What to do when you're triggered.
What to do?
That's what we're gonna call this thing. We didn't come up with a title in advance.
We pushed go before we started.
We're both triggered today by various life events we're facing in our personal lives. We just needed to hit go.
Yeah.
Hit record. And we
Maybe
felt
that's
like
the title. Just press record.
Yeah, just press record, or don't just press record. It's gonna be part of our advice later.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're keen to talk about this because guys, we get lots of guys are triggered a lot, then they're embarrassed of what they do when they're triggered. A lot of guys are trying to get better with that kind of stuff. They don't have a lot of awareness around what triggers are, or why they are the way they are. So in this episode on how to manage being triggered as a man, we're going to cover what is being triggered emotionally, how people get into trouble, why we get triggered, what to do when you're triggered, which is going to be the bulk of this, the actual steps. And we'll come at it from different angles. Sounds like Josh has studied this quite a bit, eh? I've studied this. Yeah.
I think what got me into studying the idea of being triggered is that video of the lady at a rally screaming into, it's like that clip gets used as a meme in every people being upset thing. I'm just joking, man.
Yeah, I mean, you see examples of it everywhere. These people getting upset and they think that they're in the right because it's their experience. Really, they're just triggered. Not to downplay anybody's experience, but people get triggered into intense emotions all the time.
I'm triggered by the word triggered half the time. That's like, I say that semi-comically, but also like it's become that kind of a word, Yeah,
overused, played out, kind of almost used as like an excuse for irrationality or like being unreasonable or just getting super emotional.
Yeah, I would agree.
I've seen people use it as like an out for gnarly communication, So what is being triggered, Josh? What is being triggered in
What the fuck is being triggered?
Yeah.
Trigger. So the thing I find like a little bit comical is the word triggered. If I go back and think of like, what would I have called this 10 years ago? The word triggered wasn't a word. So it would have just been
called it punching a guy in the face in hockey. That's probably what you would.
Yeah, maybe. Nah, that was fun.
Yeah.
You would have called it losing your shit or being a spaz, Like if it was low level stuff, you would call it being spazzy. If you were like flipped out, you'd call it flipping out or losing your shit. Mm-hmm. What's changed where the word trigger comes in, and I'll go back to your question in a second, is now the person who's saying it has changed. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, if I'm losing my shit, I wouldn't sit and be like, I'm losing my shit, Sean. Like that's unlikely. You would say it to me. You'd be like, Josh, you're losing your shit. Or we talk about it in third person. Man, that guy was losing his shit. Mm-hmm. Whereas now the person who's triggered is the primary source of saying it. I'm triggered. It's an interesting change in my mind.
Yeah, it is.
So what's triggered is, for me personally, for myself, I would define triggered as having a visceral, emotionally charged response to something.
Yeah, I think that's a good, concise definition. And I too have been annoyed with this change because I think what happened is the word trigger, as positive psychology became more popular in like the 2000s and 10s and 20s, it's certain people latched onto that term and then kind of abused it. It's like, oh, there's a new way for me to avoid having to take responsibility for my actions or communication, because the mind's always trying to dodge that, right? It doesn't feel comfortable to admit responsibility, admit you might have been a little worked up or something like that. And so now, I was triggered, not my fault, I was triggered, you triggered me, your fault. So I think that's what it's turned into. I would define getting triggered as having a disproportionately large emotional response for the situation that's right in front of you.
Yep.
I don't feel like, day to day, like being on the phone with the bank and the voice message comes on that's like, hello, sorry, we're expecting higher than normal call, or we're experiencing higher than normal call volumes. And it's like every time they say that, and then they say it'll probably be 20 to 30 minutes, and it's an hour and 45 minutes. Like, being frustrated in that situation isn't being triggered for me. It's if I start screaming and losing my shit and, I don't know, taking it on my partner, and, there's that next level.
Right. I think I would add to that, and it might be on the path to, control's the wrong word, but controlling it.
Managing.
It's the actual managing. It's that internal emotional thing that like, it's not a controlled thing. It just happens, right? You don't decide to be triggered, hence trigger. No. It's like something happens and it just takes place.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because some people have it a lot more than others, right? Like, everybody gets triggered.
Yeah.
I have resistance to even using that word in this conversation.
No, it sounds really
We've
funny.
already used it 100 times here. But literally everybody gets triggered. I've seen the most timid, conflict-avoidant people get triggered. I've seen really, like, assertive, leading men get triggered, But then there is this spectrum where it's like certain people don't get triggered very little, it seems. And then other people get triggered, like, all the time. And, cranky old people are like that. That's one of the archetypes,
Yep.
Why do you think that is?
I think, well, controversial take. I think people have trained themselves to be triggered. I think that the intention, the goal is not to not ever be triggered. I don't think that's possible if you're a human being. The exception being if you're a yogi, if you're an absolute yogi, like Brahmin, you spend your whole life meditating, then maybe, because you have complete detachment, you can take samadhi. So that's a different level of thing. But for the average person, the goal isn't even to not be triggered, but it's to be able to manage yourself if that happens. It's how sensitive you are. So it's a spectrum of sensitivity. And I feel like some people maybe have a natural proclivity for more sensitivity. They maybe have a personal history of traumas that increase their level of sensitivity. But I think that we're in a cultural moment where also it's like there's a name for this and I can't remember what it is, but the more something is a conversation and the more it takes place. It's like where attention goes, energy flows. Wherever you focus energy, it will expand. The example of this, for a slight tangent, if you'll indulge me, is until, 1995-ish, I don't know, I'll get the dates wrong, but somewhere in here, the idea of anorexia and bulimia, wasn't a thing. It was hyper rare, very rare. And then it suddenly went on like Oprah and became a normalized conversation. And then the cases of it in the United States went through the roof, like 10,000% growth over the next 10 years. Because it was a conversation. We need to fight against this. And it was everywhere. So there's some studies that are talking about the idea that it's like it planted a seed. So people who maybe had a proclivity to end up leaning into that, and what happened, I think triggered is somewhere in that category, like culturally right now as well, where because it's been a normal word being used and abused, now it's people are paying attention to it and are using it for themselves and are thinking it. It's like, yeah. And I think that has, for some people, heightened their sensitivity to being triggered because their brain is looking for it. Now they know what to look for, so they're looking for it. And they haven't gone through doing the work on how to deal with it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no responsibility for when they are triggered.
Right.
Because it's almost like calling alcoholism a disease or something, which is another controversial take. It's like, yes, but also, there's responsibility there. And you got it or you don't, so you got to learn how to manage it or suffer the consequences.
Yeah,
it's the same thing here. I would take it even one step further, Josh. I would say that it's not that people are even choosing to do that. It's that people are set up. Certain people are set up by their parents, by gnarly stuff that happened to them, big T traumas, little T traumas, painful experiences past, and also just like modeling patterns of processing things. So certain members of my family, for example, like they get triggered, they just direct that at the next person that's around them, like 100% of the time. You know, so that's my default, and I've been working on it, but like that's in there. So if you were to observe me versus some other people that might be a bit more emotionally moderated, like it would look like, wow, Sean's getting triggered a lot. And I would say that, yeah, that's true, and it's because of how I was brought up.
Yeah, I think going back to like where does this come from? What's the proclivity? I think in my mind, the three core elements of it are every individual person has a certain level of sensitivity. Every individual person has their own history. And culturally, we're in an environmental moment where it's a conversation which brings a lot of conversation to it.
I'd say the fourth thing in that list, too, is just this like filter that we all see the world through, which is like that we adopt from our parents. You know, we got their voice in our heads.
Yep.
And that becomes our voice. And that we perceive everything through that lens. So perhaps, you know, that'd be number 4. Culturally, yes, all those things you mentioned, but also like it's like our software is set up to run certain scripts when we have stimulus come in, you know?
I would, for me, I categorize that in like your history, right?
Yeah, that's part of the history, yeah.
But that's a more articulate, like a more detailed way of looking at it, which I agree. I didn't, you know, again, as a like subtle tangent, I wasn't sure, it wasn't that long ago, 5 years ago, I was like, I'm not sure I actually believe in generational trauma. I was like, that's not a thing. Like my brain couldn't figure it out. 180-degree flip. I'm like, absolutely, like fucking absolutely true. It is so absolutely correct. I just didn't understand it. This triggered thing that we're talking about relates to what you're saying, that I like that analogy of the software where it's like, yeah, if your brain's an AI, your AI's been trained by your parents and by your experiences, you know, to
it's
react
like,
in a certain way.
You like, let's say there's one little line of script in that software that your parents pass down to you that says, if anybody brings anything with any whiff of criticism, snap, get angry, get defensive, you know?
Yeah.
So it's not just the events as far as the history, but it's how you interpret similar events moving forward, which is the software piece, which is the mind, you know?
Yeah, I think what comes to mind, maybe this is jumping us ahead a little bit, but what's coming to mind for me right now is the result of this is you react. That's the software. The hardware, like the way that the human brain works, is that it's searching to create specific situations, and it doesn't have any judgment of good or bad, right or wrong.
No.
Like it's just solving for safety. It's just solving for winning, basically, you know, and efficiency. So that's how it sort of like misappropriates these lessons. Like, oh, if I freak out and then get what I want, it like learns that and then says we should do this again.
Oh yeah, totally. And you saw people in your household doing that, freaking out and getting their way, and so then that becomes your default strategy before you're even in an age where you understand any of those concepts. And then that sets the direction of your life, unless you learn how to manage it, which is where we're going to be talking about here today. And let's quickly talk about what the issue is with non-understanding, being triggered, and this stuff. What do you think the problem is? Like, where do people get themselves into trouble?
Yeah.
Guys especially.
I think guys especially. Well, no, I take that back. It's everyone.
It's everybody.
It's everybody. It just looks a little bit different. There's some stereotypes here, but, you know, guys probably stereotypically, I know I'm like this, end up in anger. And just I think the two places that I see and have experienced it being very problematic is one, when you're triggered and then you are so non-self-aware that you don't realize the impact you're having on everything around you and everyone around you.
So
And
well said.
the result being not what you want, and then you feel like the world is against you. And so like that can really negatively spiral you if you get stuck in that too often.
Yeah, that world against you part being an outcome, it's true. I can relate to that so much. And I see that in people that are close to me where they outburst because they're triggered. And really what they want is love or safety or closeness, or to have their feelings acknowledged. But because of the way they approached it, now people pull back even further.
Yep.
And they feel like the villain. Yeah, I could see how that spirals.
Yeah, I think many men, especially as you get older, absolutely as a parent and husband, I think it's very relatable to have that feeling of being the bad guy, of being the villain.
Yeah, I feel that. Yeah, I
right?
feel
Like
that.
as a husband and father, I feel like I'm the Wreck-It Ralph in the family. where like I'm here, and then when someone asks to lay down the law or whatever, like I'm the one who's gonna do it. Especially with my oldest, who, you know, like I'm not physical with him, but his physical stature is such that my wife couldn't physically move him if she even wanted to at this point. And since that's happened, their dynamic has changed. And it's something I've observed that I find fascinating, because it's not the same with me, because if I had to physically move him, I could move him, you know?
There's a difference
Not for much longer, but there is a difference, you know? But yeah, I think, so creating this environment outside of yourself where like it's this like negative self-perpetuating world against you scenario. And then I think the other thing about being triggered is that negative spiral itself. So how does someone get to a place where they're like depressed, for example, or where they're thinking about suicide, or where they lose their marriage, or where they act terribly as a parent, right? Or even just like loss of self-hatred. Like, how does that happen? And the trigger part is a component of this, for sure, in my mind. Because where you get into trouble is you might even know that you're triggered, even if that's not the word, but you don't know what to do with it. And maybe these aren't even 2 points. Somehow in my mind they're separate. Then you behave as if the external world is not you. And that you don't have control over anything. Yeah, I don't know. You end up in a bad place.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, and that's a result of like, we got these different parts of the brain, right? We have the lizard brain, which is like just trying to keep us safe all the time. That's the first part of the human brain that developed and develops. And then we got the monkey brain, and then we have this prefrontal cortex, which is the logical thinking brain. The challenge is when you get triggered into emotions, the amygdala is in the center, which is the emotional center, and so that gets flicked on. The rest of your logical thinking brain gets turned off, and so there's no gap between like the input, which is something you find confronting, the response of the emotions and thoughts that come up, and then usually the action, which would serve us in old times if somebody run around a corner and try to cut your head off and take your wife with a sword or something, or like an animal running around the corner, right? It's like you don't have time to think. You just got to start swinging.
Yeah.
But in our home lives, it doesn't really work. And so that gap that you can sometimes get between input and response, where it's like, okay, the sitting on the phone with the bank, you know, you can notice it, go, wow, I'm feeling frustrated, and then you can kind of like, okay, I'm gonna breathe. You can kind of like do some management strategies to like, you know, turn it down. That goes away when you're really triggered. because that monkey mind gets engaged, and then you end up doing things that make things a lot worse, and end up making a lot of men feel like they're alone and the world is against them and they're separate from the world, as you were saying.
I have something to add here too that I think is really wildly underappreciated until people sort of get it for themselves. The other element is when your amygdala is like firing and it turns off these other parts of the brain and you're in fight, flight, freeze, fawn, you're actually physically changing your body. You're changing your hormonal state, you're changing your energetic state, you're imprinting energy to your fascia, et cetera, et cetera. So for the problem with being triggered all the time or too much is that you're training your mental muscles to do it faster and easier. You're training your physical muscles to do it faster and easier, right? You're like, you develop a reflex for it. But the other weird ways that this plays out is when people talk about like symptoms of ADD, ADHD, symptoms of social isolation, symptoms of obesity or not being able to put on muscle, either end of the spectrum, symptoms of stiffness, like physical stiffness in the body, can't touch your toes. These are body responses of imprinting the experience that you've had mental emotionally. So if you're triggered all the time, like those are the other things that happen. Here's the proof test, right? Do you know anyone who is smooth, mobile in their body? They have good range of motion in general. You would call them physically fit. They have no problem running. They're athletic. They don't have to be like extreme. And they look, this is a weird one, but they look good. They're an attractive person, right? Mm-hmm. Think of someone you know that's like that, and then tell me, are they someone you would categorize as someone who's triggered all the time?
Very rarely. I can't think of anybody. I might have come across one or two, but generally no.
Generally no. I'm sure there's an exception.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Versus someone who controversial take, someone who we find ugly, someone who moves in a certain way that you're like, I can't put my finger on what it is. They move in a weird way. Someone who has like a rigidity to them. It's harder to make a connection with those people. You might not dislike them, but like there's a connection barrier for you unless you're also like that. Because those are subtle signals that our subconscious brain picks up on that tells you that that person has a heightened state.
That's really interesting observation, Josh, and I trust your observation with that because you're around working in the yoga industry. You're so around so many legitimately healthy people, and then people that are trying to be healthy. And I've now that you mention it, I haven't really thought about it, but I've observed the same thing.
Yeah. It's not even. It's more just a commentary. I mean, the physical body and the mental body and the emotional body, like they're not disconnected. These aren't separate things. No. They're all connected. The point being, what's the problem with being triggered? You could take it really, really pragmatically and just say, like, if you want to be in really good shape, like physically fit and healthy, being less triggered would be good for you.
Yeah. Across the board. Every category you look at it, it's going to be better
every
for
category. Yeah, it's going to be better for you.
And there's another part of this that I've heard referenced by psychologists as the well of pain. So you mentioned the imprinting, about how that affects your nervous system and this and that. Yeah, and in medical textbooks, it's talked about how we all have these, exactly what you said, fight, flight, freeze, and fawn response. I'd love to come back on that and have you define what that is. Actually, define what that is now, Josh.
Yeah, I mean, I think fight or flight is always a conversation. It's the idea of you corner an animal and if it's scared, it tries to run away, or if it can't run away, it will fight. But there's also shock. That's the freeze part, where like you quite literally are just frozen. That's the in shock, which that one was I've experienced that a few times in my life. And That's a tough one. As a man, my experience of that has been very difficult, because then afterwards, the self-judgment that comes behind that and the shame is fucking hardcore, like scary hardcore. And then the fawn part is the like giving up. It's like the giving into the situation. Like just, it's like to throw your hands up and being like, I'm totally out of control in all levels.
Kind of like futile thinking, acquiescing, the elephant on the rope kind of thing.
Yeah. So, I mean, those are normal potential responses. Just the same as in the beginning, at least, what triggers you is not necessarily within your conscious control. I think same thing, your reaction to it, not necessarily within your conscious control.
Yeah.
They're all an equal response, right? It's just, they're just different.
Yeah, and they're often actually, like, which we default to is often trained when we're younger based on how people respond around us. Yeah, so that's a thing. And then there's this concept of, like, this well of pain that we have. And what that is like when animals, like if a gazelle's on the Serengeti or whatever, and it's being chased by a lion, and this already sounds terrible, but I experienced it to be true. If an animal's chased by a predator, if the animal gets away, or like if a bird hits a window, it'll have to sit there and shake out what just happened, or else some animals will die. So if a gazelle's running away from a lion, it gets away, it'll go find a bush and literally shake for like hours and hours and hours. What is that? Well, that's the nervous system shaking out, burning off that excess energy that the body just put into the body to get away from that dangerous situation, which is like hormones and all sorts of stuff like that. The challenge is that if we don't move that energy, which is one of the strategies for dealing with these things, moving the energy, it'll actually get imprinted into the nervous system, the fascia, exactly what you said before. And so, of course, none of us have made it through life without these experiences where we got to move that energy. Sometimes we were in public settings, sometimes it was with our parents and we were young and we couldn't say anything back, otherwise it would get worse. So we all have these wells of pain, and those things get these old wounds, and they get poked at by situations that come into our lives. And for everybody, those wells of pain around different topics. I've got one funny story. So I've been cheated on a couple different relationships. Like, that's a bit of a sore spot for me, right? But for other people, that's fine. I was once at a party, and we were making tax jokes, and a guy looked like he was about to cry, and then, you guys are assholes, and walked away. Turns out he was being audited because he hadn't filed his taxes in like 8 years. And he's had all these issues with the IRS or whatever. So it's like, where we get triggered, how we get triggered is different for everybody, but we all have these different wells of pain from these past experiences where we didn't get to express that energy, and it got imprinted into our nervous systems. Yeah.
I think about it sometimes. I don't know where I got this analogy, but if in your physical body were guitar strings, I know just because you play guitar as well, and each string then gets tuned, so it's a certain tune, and it's there, but the guitar string is there, and it's not doing anything. But then when someone plucks it, then it vibrates and lets the sound out. That's the trauma is what it's tuned to, and the trigger is that someone plucks it.
I got a lot of different notes in me. I don't know about you. I got like I'm like a 100-string guitar.
I was gonna say it's an 87-string guitar, but 5 necks.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah, the fight, flight, fawn, freeze. To go back to that, I think. What's interesting about it is fight being like anger, frustration, flight, avoidance or withdrawal, or like literal flight, running away. Freeze is like the paralysis, inability to act. And then fawn is, I couldn't remember what the detail is. It's like people pleasing. People pleasing would be an example of that. It's avoidance of conflict completely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Always folding, always caving, which is different than freezing. Freezing's like...
Right. Like literally can't do anything. Yeah.
Yeah. Fawning is more like just giving up. And
So I think that there's probably a proclivity based off of previous experience for most people where you land in a certain situation automatically, but also you move through these reactions. Like you might start by fighting and then end up in flight and then freeze and then fawn.
that's true.
Right? Like
Good point.
from the same situation, like if it keeps going. And
Interesting.
thinking about like polyvagal theory, there's sort of this escalation that can happen where we talked about this in the previous episode, I think a little bit first as well. Like when you're well balanced, you can easily engage, you can stay calm, your breathing is good, you move easily, and then you move into fight or flight first is the theory. That you actually get into this like adrenal response, ready to go state. And then if you don't deal with it at that point, then you go into the freeze. Going back to the gazelle shaking thing. If you go through and you're in this fight or flight, and then you stay there for too long, and then it imprints, quite literally it's like imprinting that on the body. And that's where the shaking comes from with animals. I observed that as well. I used to do marine mammal observation as a job, and that was an interesting thing we would see. But that's where a lot of physical movement therapy historically has been and is now. So like yoga, the purpose of asana at first was to condition the body for meditation, is the theory, the interpretation. But then it becomes, it's not conditioning the body physically, although yes, as well. It's conditioning the body mental, emotionally. And it's gaining control over the body. It's gaining control over the autonomic nervous system. So things that are just happening automatically, it's being able to become conscious of them and control them. And the path to do that is getting rid of the automatic reaction to something. So if someone has a lot of trauma, it will be difficult to move in certain postures. And there's entire philosophies on like what a posture even means, and why like a hip, why would your left hip not move right, or your right knee, or whatever, you know.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot. I've seen lots of different people have like, why is it that my friend has a nagging hip, and then I have neck issues? You know,
right? Yeah,
makes sense.
Crash course. Left side of the body generally is feminine energy. Right side is generally masculine energy. Your external body connects to your internal body, so your chakral system, and also your spine is the core of all of that. So, for example, something that would be lower down in the body would be further into the past. It's sunk down over time. So, let's say you have like a left knee that is really bothering you and you can't really explain it. That could have something to do with a past relationship with something feminine.
Interesting.
Because the knee connects to the heart chakra, hence the relationship part. So does the elbow. You have a sore elbow that has to do with the heart chakra too.
Cool.
Your shoulders are how you show your public self. Your hips are your private self. So someone with a lot of issues in the hips might have more internal dialogue to be dealing with and unpack. Someone who's got a lot of shoulder stuff, it's more about how they are judging themselves versus the external world. Neck is like the weight of the world on your shoulders, but like right now. Whereas low back is like the past pain that you've had to go through.
That's fascinating, because I have noticed it in my own experience that when if I have an achy neck, or if I have like shoulder injury, if I breathe into those things, often there's different emotions behind them. Like there's different flavors to the feeling of pain, you know?
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
I have a friend who does TRE, traumatic release exercises.
Yeah.
And if you've never heard of it, anyone listening, and you want to do like the most easy, passive, yet effective thing ever, TRE is it. It's kind of, you literally like lay down on the ground and shake. And the first time you do it, if you haven't done stuff like this before, like it feels fucking crazy. You're like, this is weird. Like we're like literally just shaking around on the ground.
Yeah.
But it comes out of what we're talking about, which is these imprinted things in the body, like the shaking is to get that moving and out. Emotion is supposed to be energy in motion.
Yes.
So when you have trauma, it's when you are taking it on and trapping it. So you have to get it in motion again.
Makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, that's going to be one of my points as far as what to do with this stuff, because I've delved deep into I wouldn't say TRE, but I call it somatic meditation.
Yep.
Where you meditate into the feelings in your body, and often, it can bring up shaking and stuff like that, which is the nervous system shaking out the trauma. No different from that gazelle. Side note, by the way, while we're on the topic of fight, flight, freeze, and the nervous system trapping emotions and energy and shaking out, the best book on this is Waking the Tiger by Peter Levine. If you haven't checked it out, this is where all the he outlines a ton of research around this and explains that all this stuff that Josh and I are poorly paraphrasing. But fantastic resource. When I read that, it just took the pressure off my shoulders, because I was like, oh, it's not just me, Like, this is just normal. It's not my fault. I'm not weak. I'm not wired wrong. It's just how I was raised, and then the nervous system. The human body's funny, like hiccups. We do have these defects that don't really help us in certain situations. Like, the human body's not perfect. One of them is the nervous system seems to hold on to this energy, and then when you find yourself in a similar situation that reminds you of that difficult situation, that energy's poked at.
Yeah.
And it comes out. Simple as that. So, yeah, TRE. That's a great suggestion, Josh. So let's get into the big stuff here, like what to do when we're triggered. That's what guys want to know, right? It's intense, it's overwhelming. I don't like. What does it feel like to you in the moment? To me, it just feels like when I'm triggered, it's like tunnel vision. Like logic and common sense goes away. This emotion is completely dominating the movie screen of my consciousness.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm in the right. Like,
yeah.
100%, so righteous. But I'm touchy about it too. I'm defensive.
Yeah.
I could play victim if it doesn't go well. How about you?
Yeah, I relate to everything you're saying. I think for when I'm very triggered, there's an irrationality for sure. And then also for me, if it gets too extreme, it feels like everything is imploding.
Yes.
My brain attaches one event that might not be that major and completely unrelated to something else, and it's just like fucking spiral. Like, just
it's a spiral. Yeah, it's like a catastrophe.
My business sucks.
Spiral.
My marriage is falling apart. I'm a shit father. I hate my house.
Yeah.
It's too hot. Why'd that asshole fucking hit my truck? Like, it just like all of it at the same time. They're like, dude, you just literally spilt the milk. Like,
yeah, no big deal.
No, yeah,
yeah, but
so
it
can't go that far.
But and that's a really common one for guys. And I think it's because a lot of people's parents are hard on them. So you spill the milk, and then they're like, going, oh, why'd you do that? Oh no, shame, guilt, disapproval, all this stuff. And little kids don't know how to process that. So then they feel like it is them, and they feel shame and low self-worth. And so when we run into these situations where we're triggered and you go through all those phases that we talked about earlier, then I think where it ends up in is exactly that, like kind of a shame spiral.
I was going to say the shame spiral. Yeah, that's exactly the right wording. Like, for me, my most common reaction is anger first. Like, I feel frustrated, and then anger is what bubbles up. Mm-hmm. And then that can turn into self-judgment, which then makes me more angry, and that's the spiral. Yeah. It's like, I'm angry, and then now I'm angry that I'm angry. So then I get more angry.
Totally.
Like, oh my God, what are we doing
here?
That's
so funny. I love articulating this stuff. That's why I love talking about it, because it's so ridiculous. But it's just the mind, again, reaching to try to create safety, just panicking, safety. The frustration and anger thing, just as a side note, is a good tell, because a lot of men, it seems like their default is anger. But in my experience through somatic meditation or like exploring these feelings, behind that anger is always a different emotion. It's almost like anger is a cap that sits on top of what we're actually feeling. I don't know if it's like a biological thing because men used to fight a lot, and so anger is the default for survival, or if it's just like we've been shamed for other feelings, but anger was fine to express playing sports and stuff like that. But either way, like often if I feel really angry and then I'm really angry and I go hit the punching bag or something, if I sit with that after, all of a sudden the crying tingles start to come up. It's like there's sadness or there's shame or there's just feeling overwhelmed behind that.
I think that like when I in therapy and stuff have unpacked deeper big traumas, losing my daughter, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. What's interesting is going through that cycle that like adrenal response will kick in first. So I'll get angry, I'll get sweaty, like I'll physically start sweating.
Hot, sweaty, right? Tunnel vision.
My muscles, if you were to like look at my arms, they like get vascular, right? Wow. I'm like ready to go. I'm like, we're fighting. It's a hypervigilance response. And then the next thing is like, no, sad. So I think for a lot of guys, I don't know why, but it seems to be a common thread that anger's there first. And I think that that's a protective thing.
Yeah.
Right? Like if I get angry and I'm ready to fight, at least I can keep myself safe because I can fight,
Yeah, that makes sense.
When I've experienced things where I can't fight, that's where I end up in the freeze personally. And that's hard. That's where then you self-judge that, after the fact.
Yeah. And I think it's like, I wonder if it's like just this modern way of living where we don't really have to fight beasts or we don't have to fight rivaling tribes. And so we don't like have a lot of outlet for that, maybe aside from sports, or whatever. But the mind's still interpreting these events as benign as they might be compared to what the real threats used to be. Like me sitting on hold with the bank and getting angry versus like, a warring tribe coming over the hill and raping and pillaging everybody I love. Yeah, like it's the brain's just hardwired to go straight to anger because of those millions of years of that being the reality.
And I don't know. I've never actually read anything on this. I would be curious if this was true, but I wonder if, and I'm sure it's different for different people. Maybe it's different for men and women too, but I wonder if there is a situational impact on whether you end up in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And we live in an environment in Western culture, especially, that's comfortable enough that anger is the thing that can happen because it's an option. And here's the example. Here's where my mind is coming up with this, right? Like when I was driving the truck down this year with my son, I think I mentioned this. We got pulled over by the cartel twice, actually, in a roadblock. But the first one, we were fucked. We were totally stuck. It was a roadblock. They had physically blocked the road with concrete, so you couldn't you couldn't escape. There was 10 of them, heavily armed. Like they had us. And my reaction wasn't fight right then. It started to go into the fawn part.
I thought you were going to say joining them. Your reaction was to join them. Yeah.
Yeah. Hence the fawn. It'd be like, yo, you guys, are you hiring? Because
how do you get in on this? How can I get in on this?
But after the fact, I was angry about the situation. I also went through that. But in the moment, anger wasn't what came up right away. And I had my shit together enough that we handled it fine. Nothing bad happened, whatever. Story for another time. But thinking about it in hindsight, I wonder if the reaction's different. It's not like, oh, I was triggered by this thing and then I just automatically, because I'm my dude, I'm always going to be angry. It wasn't in that case, because had I have gotten angry in that situation, that would have put us in more dangerous.
True.
Like, we would
It's
have been in trouble.
contextual.
If I tried to fight them in some way, it would have put us in a lot of danger.
Right. So it is contextual.
Yeah.
Something about your mind is like, okay, anger wouldn't serve here.
Right.
It doesn't always do this, but maybe in extreme enough situations, it's like, okay, getting angry isn't going to create safety. I'm going to take another approach.
Right. Versus on the phone with a bank, freeze, that doesn't do anything. Fawn doesn't do anything. Flight.
No.
The only thing that logically makes any little bit of sense, which still doesn't, would be fight. Would be
Abuse that poor person on the other end of the line that
fucking
can't
yell
change
at
anything. Yeah, totally.
Right. Or even like you're on the phone, you're like, these motherfuckers, and you're freaking out
Totally.
and being a spaz, but like energy's moving when you're doing that.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Not the worst thing. Yeah, and here's another angle at it too. Like, I've noticed that if anything coming at me resembles like the dynamic between myself and some of the stuff that's going on in my house, where like parent, unreasonable, and directing that at me, I'll freeze. That's my default, right? It's not anger. It's not fuck you. It's if it reminds me that dynamic of me being stuck and like I'm not going to win no matter what happens, I'll just freeze and fawn, like almost immediately. Yeah. So it is contextual. Definitely is. Yeah, that's interesting. So what else guys do about it, Josh?
Yeah, I want to just add one more thought there to go back to sort of tie this together. So I think that it is contextual, but I also think you made me think of this, Sean, when you're talking about like, you know, what it would have been like, whatever, throughout history. I think that men maybe lack an outlet for anger, a positive outlet, so that actually perpetuates it is one. And I think, two, we live so comfortably that anger, even if it's not accepted, because there's a big war against anger right now, in my opinion, too. Even if it's not accepted, it is the most accepted of the reactions from a guy. Mm-hmm. And so we get away with it.
That's interesting. Yeah, we do. And it makes sense because life has gotten so cushy. Like, life was so hard before. Just to survive, like going and getting water from kilometers away and killing animals just so you can eat and dragging the animals back. And, oh, the neighboring tribe is coming over the hill even though both tribes are struggling. It's like, you know, it's human history is pretty gnarly. And now and those are all those are outlets for, like, physical outlets for energy, right? And now we don't really have those unless you're, like, really intentional about it. Yeah, so it makes sense that anger is shooting out all over the place for a lot of guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
All right,
So
how do we deal with
about
it?
What do we do?
What the fuck do we do?
What the fuck do we do about it? Somebody please tell me what to do. I remember I just saw this meme that was like, 13-year-old me, don't tell me what to do. 40-year-old me, please tell me exactly in detail steps what to do. Please.
It's so true. It's so true.
Yeah.
You can't tell me what to do. Please give me all details.
Yeah.
Send help. Yeah. What do you do about it? I think you go through a midlife crisis, buy a sports car and a gun, and fucking turn all the lights off and race down the highway. It's like, chase me, kappas. You know,
just let the energy go. Just let it shoot out however it wants to shoot out. Let the mind go.
Yeah,
take it
just
off
be a
its chain.
maniac. Just be a maniac.
Unshackle your mind. Just let it make the decisions for you.
Yeah, or just fucking Netflix and eat food and depress yourself into oblivion. You know, become part of your bed. I'm saying
when I was younger, that first strategy you said was more my approach. It's like, go out and just chase the girls and try to be cool and all this stuff and live this crazy life. And now my approach is more like, my default's more like hide into Netflix and YouTube and junk food. So you just describe me and my the maturity of the cycle of my immaturity.
Yeah, I'm describing myself. You know, like I think it's a normal thing. I mean, so okay, what do you do? Obviously, well, actually, not obviously. Ultimately, you discover that those mechanisms don't work. Some people maybe don't discover that, and that's tough because I think they punish themselves as a result unnecessarily.
Yeah, you gotta get real with that, don't you? You gotta be real. Like, this isn't working. That's probably step one. This, whatever this software is I'm running, it's not getting me the results that I want.
Yeah. Yeah. The comment I would make on that is I've been there at different moments in my life, and I've seen, especially in the last decade of my life, but last 5 years especially, I have acquaintances and experiences with people who are my age and a little bit older with kids and stuff like that. And like, you can kind of see it now. You can see it where it's like a person is behaving and escaping and giving into doing and behaving a certain way that it's like, that would have made sense when we were 25. But like, we're fucking 45, bro. Like, that's not, wake up. It's not going to work. It's not going to work. No wonder you're depressed. Like, that's not going to work, sort of thing. So, no judgment. Just, that's like the self-pep talk is like, what was your wording? Like running a different program.
Yeah.
The four steps of what to actually do, in my mind, is number 1 is awareness. Number 2, self-regulation. Number 3 is expression. Number 4 is do the actual healing work. But the big one being, first off, awareness. In yoga, the crux of the entire philosophy of everything is awareness above everything else. And even in business, as a coach, I end up having this conversation a lot with people where if we had to define like what is the number one problem in a business for the business owner, it's a lack of awareness. Because awareness about whatever the thing is has to be there. It's non-optional. You must become aware of whatever the thing is first before you can even start to do anything. So the triggered part, I think, is step 1 is awareness. Really being able to, like, noticing that you're triggered, which my experience was when we say something like that, my assumption in the past would have been like, I should notice it like in real time. But in the beginning I couldn't. And like, I'm not perfect at this either by any means, but in the beginning I couldn't. I could only look back afterwards and self-assess and be like, oh, that's what happened. Like, so, but then in doing that, then you get closer and closer. Like, it was like painful to look back at myself, be like, I shouldn't have done that yesterday. And then it's like, you can do it an hour afterwards. And then it's like, you see yourself doing it and you still can't stop it. But like the closeness of the awareness to what's happening to the moment of now, that gap tightened for me over time.
Yes. Interesting.
So step 1, awareness.
In the moment, that's hard because you're so fired up. You're in this experience. To me, it feels like, and the only way that I've been able to get awareness in the moment is to get my foot in the door between the situation and then the response is to take a couple of breaths. Like, that's really it. Like, it's kind of like in the movies, when a car goes into like the water and the car's filling up and somebody's thrashing against the door, but they have to stop to take like a couple breaths out of the top, like sip some air. Like, that's what it feels like to me. I'm triggered. Oh wow, these emotions are welling up. What do I do? Okay, 5 breaths. And then I'm like, and then I have the capacity to engage that frontal cortex a little bit. Like, okay, what's actually going on here? What am I feeling? What, and then I can bring awareness to it.
So my interpretation of what you're saying, like, I agree with what you're saying. To me, awareness and then self-regulation, the bridge between them is quick. It's a small bridge. The awareness part, the thing that I find fascinating is like this sort of work on yourself helps to take you down the path of questioning like the true nature of reality altogether in my mind, because awareness creates a scenario where at some point you see yourself experiencing something, but then you observe it. You take the position of the observer. I'm like looking at myself as I'm angry and knowing that I'm angry as I'm angry. So then the question is like, who the fuck is that? Who's looking at me angry? Which means I'm not my anger.
Bingo.
That's fascinating. So the awareness part, I think, is weirdly empowering. And that, to me, is then the next step being the self-regulation.
Yeah.
Which there's different techniques. I think we should discuss a couple, but the counting part or the breathing part, absolutely.
Yeah, so let's stay on the
breathing is a
topic
huge
now
one.
because I saw a generational trauma therapist. Similar to you, I thought that was nonsense, and then I realized, oh damn, I got some of that kicking around. You know, when I was sick, I was seeing one of the top functional medicine doctors in North America, maybe the world, like, and I've seen some pretty Top Gun therapists and whatever, and like all of them said the same thing. Sean, there's really only one healing move. And I was like, what is it? And they're like, when you're triggered, no matter what it is you're doing, step away and breathe into your body and just hang out with those feelings. And I was like, but what if I'm out and about with people? Like, go into a bathroom, just sit there in your clothes with the toilet, with the door closed. Like, let yourself, like, excuse yourself outside. Pretend like you gotta take a phone call, whatever it is, because that's gonna create the space for you to have some awareness around it. And it's also a pattern interrupt. And because if you're just constantly going into the response, you're never gonna learn the lesson. You're never gonna make friends with it and stop that reaction from happening. So the only way is to stop, take the focus from out here, which is usually like super tunnel vision about this problem that you're upset about or triggered about, and just like, whoa, I got a lot of tension in my chest right now. Whoa, I got a lot of tension in my neck. Wow, I feel like, whatever. What do you think about that?
For just a second when you were describing it, I thought you were going to say, jerk it. There's only one solution.
I will neither confirm nor deny that I've tried that, but
oh my fuck.
It's a pattern interrupt. That's probably one of the best pattern interrupts. But then you're gonna have a new problem, which is now you got a new masturbation habit, and most of us guys don't need more masturbation.
We don't need more of it. I mean, no, I think it's interesting to sort of sum up all of these different things that people describe, but I agree. If I look at any technique that I've ever used or ever heard, it could be summed up categorically into that. It's like taking this moment aside for a second and sitting with it. Absolutely. And I think that the other thing, counting, breath, meditate, whatever, like punching bag, those are all just the excuse to do that, basically.
Yeah. Well, that's what comes next, right? Is once you've gotten yourself out of that pattern of in this fucking tunnel of anger or sadness or shame or whatever it is, like you're in the shame tunnel. It's like once you've kind of got a little bit of distance from that, then you can suss out what you need. So it usually goes like this for me. It's like, if I'm able to step away from that phone call at the bank, if I'm losing my shit and go, whoa, I'm feeling really angry. Fuck, I'll go hit the bag. And then I will, It's like the management strategies come as a result of that awareness.
Yep. The management strategies. So awareness, sitting with yourself. This is jumping us ahead a little bit too, but I think, because the fourth element is like the healing work element, where you're like unpacking deeper stuff about yourself and self-discovery, etc. But then that goes back in the awareness part. So like when you sit with yourself, then for me, one of the management strategies that happens right after looking at it for a second is self-talk, like literally talking to myself. That plays out in a couple of different ways. Sometimes if I'm really more grounded, it's like catching a thought as it's happening and then just looking at the thought and be like, huh, that's interesting. Like or like actually saying to myself, like, that's a dumb thought,
Yeah.
right? Oh, my wife hates me. I'm like, that's stupid.
She doesn't. Fact. She doesn't. Fact. 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 Fact.
Yeah, that's not true. What the fuck are you
Yeah.
talking about, idiot?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And sometimes it's deeper. It's like talking to whatever you want to call it. Talking to your exile, talking to your manager, your firefighter, your fighter, your inner child, it's like this version of yourself that you split from your core self through your traumatic experiences of life that's now in the driver's seat for a second.
Mm-hmm.
That version of you, that quote person, is in the driver's seat because they think they need to be to protect you in some way.
Mm-hmm.
So that's who I'm talking to. It sounds psychotic if you haven't done it, right? But it's like I even have a clear image of a couple of my managers, and one of them I'm like, oh hey, interesting that you're here managing this right now.
Oh, you again? Yeah, the guy who's angry
you
on
again.
the phone again or whatever. Yeah.
What's up, dude? Like, what are we protecting here? What do you need?
Yeah.
Like, actually asking them that question.
Yeah. I do the same.
It's hard to do. Like, this is easier said than done. But my experience has been, if you can get quiet with yourself for a second, if I can do some self-talk, and sometimes it's very quick, past that moment in time, with the exception of an actually extreme situation, I can't stay in the triggered state anymore. Like, if I was to stay in, let's use anger as the example, it's because I would be deciding to be.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so it's interesting. It's that pattern interrupt where it's like,
Yeah, it does, yeah. Or at least for me, it's not as intense. I might still be angry, and then I know what to do, and it'll go hit the bag. But it's turned down. The volume's turned down 50%.
yeah. Which I would say, like, that's kind of the point. It's okay. You're angry, cool. That's no problem.
Mm-hmm.
But staying angry is not about it being a problem. But like then that's on you. You know, it's not
Totally.
It's not a reaction anymore. Now it's a choice.
Yeah, you're perpetuating it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And it always ends up in self-talk for me. It's like if I sit with myself, I'm like, whoa, why do I feel sad? And then it's like, and I can ask myself that, or maybe it's a certain kind of self-talk. I remember in a men's group, one guy, his language with his, whatever you want to call it, manager or inner child or mind was like, good boy. That was this thing that would kind of open it up. Like, because sometimes those feelings, they're like capped, and they don't want to tell you. It feels like they're down here, and you're like, hey, what are you feeling? And they're like down there, and you can't get at them, and they're like scared to open up, And so he'd say, good boy, and then it would open up. And I tried that, and it didn't work for me, So like the language, the way you approach it, seems like it's different for everybody. But the one thing that's in common is there's always some kind of self-talk. And I read a great book called Becoming the Kind Father, which talks about how most men didn't have kind fathers, and so you need to learn how to do that to yourself. And the moments when not only are the best opportunity, but when we need it the most are when we're triggered. Become your own kind father. Put your arm around that part of yourself and go, wow, hey, man, you're upset. Are you doing okay? Like, what are you feeling? And often not a lot will come up, but like even when I just there, a little bit of tingles down my spine right now, It's like that little boy. He didn't get a lot of that kind of talk growing up, and he's showing me that he wants it. And so that not only is a great opportunity to pattern her up, but I feel like, and part two that all these kind of like experts that have told me about this said is when you're actually triggered, it's actually the number one best opportunity to get into those old wells of pain and those old imprintings of your nervous system and to clear them out so that you're no longer triggered in the same way.
Yeah.
So like I've had some good fights with family, for example, and then I go to do some somatic meditation and I shake a bit of this out, or I go cry a bit of this out and talk to myself and be there for myself. And it sounds so crazy, and it would probably look crazy if you filmed me on the floor shaking and crying away. But then afterwards, I'm not nearly as triggered as much in that same way that I used to be. And it seems to be fairly permanent. Like, it's not like I'm good for half a day. It's like years down the line, I encounter a similar situation, I'm triggered like 20% of what I used to be.
Yeah.
And I think it's because I got the opportunity. I cleared that well of pain out. So when you're the most angry, it's actually that's a window of opportunity to actually get in there and be there for yourself.
I like that. I think it's a comforting thought for me, actually, right? That like, and maybe this is a little bit related to that idea of it's got to get worse before it gets better. You know, like the only way out is the only way out is through. Exactly.
Yeah. Night is darkest before the dawn, kind of thing.
Yeah. I'm Batman. But yeah, I would say that it just makes sense to me. It's been more my experience too. But again, emotion is energy in motion. So you've got to get that stuff moving and out. Like it's got to come out somehow, and it will come out somehow. If you try to not have it come out, it's going to anyways.
Yeah.
Maybe just not in a productive way. I think the other thing I would add to this self-talk, because that's absolutely a component of this, and here's the two things. One would be, you've mentioned like hitting the bag or something. At least as a man, and I think I don't have any male friends that don't relate to this when we talk about it. Like physical movement, I mean like fucking hard physical movement is a massively empowering thing if you're in a state of heightened activation. And I think about when I was a teenager, my dad grew up in Canada, and he's like didn't believe in paying for electricity to heat the house. So we lived in an
good old-fashioned Canadian dad thing.
Good old Canadian dad thing. Yeah.
Don't touch the thermostat.
Yeah, don't touch the thermostat. It's turned off, even though it's freezing. We lived in an A-frame. He's like, we had a wood stove, and his saying was, he's like, wood-fired heat's the best because you get hot when you chop the wood, you get hot when you stack the wood, you get hot when you burn the wood, and it keeps it. It heats you like 3 or 4 times. It's the most efficient way to do it. And for anyone listening who thinks like, oh, that's a wintertime thing, no, it's not if you're in a family who heats with wood. Because in the middle of summer, we'd be driving the truck down the highway and there'd be a tree falling over, and he'd just fucking pull over. Be like, let's buck up this log real quick. Gonna need some firewood in 6 months from now. Like, anyways.
Yeah, you got to dry out in advance, so that's a real thing, yeah.
But that little tangent down memory lane aside, I always had firewood to chop. And so I can remember breaking up with this girl when I was like 15, and I think I must have chopped a cord of firewood. Like I was just so pissed off. just giving her, you know, I've often thought I should, you know, there's no reason for us to have any heat in our house in Mexico here, but should just have a stack of firewood to chop out here for my son just because.
Wood.
Yeah. So hard physical movement. And then the other one more recently for me has been temperature change. So I have an ice bath, and my same friend I was referring to that does TRE, one of the things he recommends too is like just keep a bowl of water in your fridge, like a big bowl. And if you have an ice maker, and it's like when you're feeling really out of sorts, take that bowl out, chuck some ice in it, put your hands in it and your face in it. Hold your breath and put your face in it for as long as you can. Yeah. And like you can't, same thing. I jump in the ice bath, and even my daughter, who's 9, she jumps in or whatever. When she's like, and now she knows she has a little bit of freak out, and I'm like, hey, like, let's go in the ice bath for a minute.
Get in the ice bath. No.
But you can't. I don't make her. She does it. But it's you know, you can't get into an environmental temperature shift that extreme and your energies stay the same. It's like not. I don't know why. It's not possible though. You can't stay at the same vibration, right? Like something has to shift.
No, it's true. I really agree with you. Those are the 2 best management strategies for me. So it's like stepping away, breathing into it, but then what do you do with the feelings that are still there? It's and I say punching bag because I had a mentor tell me it has to be a movement where you're pushing away against something. No. With anger in particular, like, yeah, you can go for a jog and that'll help with anxiety, and like movement's movement, right? It's great, but like surfing doesn't do it for me. If I'm angry, occasionally I have a ragey surf and it'll work out well, but usually it doesn't. It's got to be some kind of like pushing away, like even just pushing against the wall, like doing some push-ups against the wall if you have to, or like punching bag or smashing pillows. There's got to be some kind of like fuck you, push away energy, and chopping wood is a great example of that. Or this one time, actually, I was in a weird situation where I was in a sauna at a hotel on a beach, and I had this situation that triggered me a lot. So I went to the woods out behind the hotel, and I grabbed rocks and sticks and just smashed them against the trees. And it was like nobody was around, so nobody could see me. Otherwise, I would have looked completely crazy. But I went from being like tuning fork wired sympathetic dominance to like, okay, I can imagine now, it's fine.
Or
and then, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, so one I like is if you can push against a wall, you said, but go in a door frame. Go in a door frame and just try to break the door frame. Like just push out as hard as you can.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
that's a very good one. Yeah, and then the temperature. Just a quick story. I did iboga, which is a plant medicine, psychedelic, similar to ayahuasca, just probably more powerful. And after the second one, it was a difficult experience, very beneficial. But my nervous system was like wired like a tuning fork, like crazy anxiety. I've had that a few times in my life, like after I got cheated on and stuff, where I just couldn't get out of sympathetic dominance. And so I was trying to breathe, and I was trying yoga, and the leader was like, "Just keep. It's okay. You're gonna be fine. Just keep going." And side note, Josh, we can wrap it up here shortly. I know you're on a tight timeline today. And so I tried 5, 6, 7 different things to get myself to settle down emotionally, which is something I was never taught to do. So I've always found it fairly difficult. And the last thing I tried to do was I went and had a really hot shower, and my nervous system just went, And so I've seen that in my life too, that temperature really makes a big difference. Even washing my hands in like hot water, sometimes I'll notice it. If I'm emotional about something, I'm like washing my hands in nice hot water, I'm just like, woo.
Yeah.
It's kind of like melts me a little bit. So yeah, that's a great one. Yeah, I like that a lot.
The temperature. Yeah, I think environmental change is the way I would say, like, the temperature change is like the extreme version of that. But, if I'm like in the house spiraling, if I'm activated and staying activated, like I've got to get out of the house.
Yeah,
or
get
I've
out.
got to go in the ice bath, or I've got to push, or like you've got to change the state, literally your state, but like change the environment you're in. So if you're warm, get cold. If you're cold, get hot. If you're lethargic, go move. If you're
yeah, the other day, Katie, this doesn't work if I'm really triggered and anger or whatever, but the other day I was like frustrated and a little angsty about something, and Katie put on some music that I like, and she's like dragged me in the kitchen. We had a little dance party, and that completely got me out of it immediately,
Yeah.
So that's the thing, changing channels. One last thing here, Josh, as well. I found it really beneficial as I was stepping away from these things, as somebody who wanted to like eliminate them, because these triggers aren't beneficial, the responses and the triggers. So I like the idea of clearing out those wells of pain, and thus far in my life I've actually seen a lot of benefit from that, like no longer getting triggered in the ways that I used to be, becoming a happy, more well-balanced man in general. And one of the tools that helped me quite a bit is as I was navigating this, as I was starting to step away from situations where I was triggered and feeling into it, and cheerleading and self-talk and all these things we're talking about, is I noticed the same situations coming up over and over again. So I started tracking them, and I called it my trigger book. And it was just a note on my phone, in notes on my iPhone, and every time I'd be triggered, I'd write down what the situation was, and very short, like girl across room or whatever, or parents call or whatever, and then what I felt, and then what came up when I breathed into it. And over time, I could see there was the same 3 or 4 kinds of situations and responses, and that helped me identify when it was happening the next time. Or the next times, and then that really helped me manage it, because instead of just getting caught up in it, I could be like, oh, this is that same old thing that I find difficult for these reasons, and it's shining a light in that dark corner. So tracking it, what gets measured gets managed, and we're not exactly measuring this, but like by the end of me doing that list, because I started this exploration maybe like 7 or 8 years ago. I think I had a log of like 2 years and like hundreds of events, because I was getting triggered every day, multiple times a day, different situations. But there was always a common flavor and common theme, and then I got to take that to my therapist and talk through that and understand why that is. That brought more compassion and more awareness, and then I was able to learn to manage it.
Yeah. To be clear, for anyone listening, what we're not talking about is write down all the things that trigger you in a book so that you can give it to other people and be like, here's my triggers. Here's my triggers for you to avoid.
Totally.
Can we not clap loudly because it triggers me? Yeah, no.
Yeah, totally. Or just do complain or like list out all the things you're annoyed by. That's not the point. It's to understand the pattern, your response, what you're actually feeling, what you actually need in those moments. Yeah.
The pattern identification, I think, is crazy powerful. So in CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, that's one of the drills that you do. The idea, one of the ideas being, you have an emotion that's automatically triggered. It's like not a controlled thing; it just happens. On top of that, you have an automatic thought, which is very simple, surface level thought. But the emotion below it, on the other side, you have a core thought or a core belief, which comes from something somewhere. Mm-hmm. When you go through the effort of like, oh, I'm noticing this emotion and I'm noticing this thought on top of it, which is perpetuating the emotion, right? And then you write that down, it lets you reverse engineer it. And eventually what you start to be able to get into deeper is, I've had these 5 situations, but what's like the core belief or core thought below all of this that's similar across all of them? Mm-hmm. And hence the awareness part. So this is like that 4th step of that healing work.
Yes.
This stuff is fucking uncomfortable. And this is not real-time management in my mind. This is going deeper so that, what did you say? Emptying the bucket or whatever. But it's like
the well of pain,
the well of pain. You're removing some of the sensitivity to this. In DBT, dialectic behavior therapy, there's sensitivity training where it's like you're kind of trying to desensitize, but in essence it's the same thing. It's not by purposefully bringing things up in a negative way, but rather bringing hyper awareness to them and like looking at them when you're in a safe environment and safe space, noticing those patterns, recognizing it, etc.
That makes sense. And just one asterisk on this I want to put on this before we get to our last point and then we close, is I thought that I had to like identify specific beliefs or events and like articulate them well that were causing to this. And a lot of the triggers and responses that I was having, it was more just like getting really familiar with the feeling state that I'd end up in, because I couldn't identify with therapy and psychedelics and plant medicines. I couldn't actually identify like where that belief came from, or there wasn't one clear vision of, being abused with this in this particular area. It's just like, this is my pattern. This is my kind of response. It's really getting to know that flavor of feeling. And so that when it pops up, I know what it is and I know what to do,
Yeah, I love that. My thought off of that is, because why? Like, who cares? So maybe there is a specific event you can trace something back to. Fine. Mm-hmm. I have that,
I have a few. Yeah.
But other things, if you can't identify, like, who cares? You don't need to. It doesn't matter. Yeah. It's noticing the pattern and the emotion part. A guy that I talk to here often, his name's Adrian. He was saying, and this is the translation from Spanish, but he's saying, hang on, I have to translate it. you don't ask. you don't ask. So you don't ask why. You ask what for. And in English that it does work. So it's not why did this happen? Why does this happen? Why am I like this? Like, who cares why? Mm-hmm. What for? To what end? For what purpose? Mm-hmm. To what lesson? To what outcome? Is the switch. And for me, that's been a helpful thought with some of this deeper work stuff we're talking about, where Yeah, whether I can identify why exactly I have the pattern of this or that or whatever, like, who gives a shit? What for? Like, what's the purpose of it?
What's it trying to get? And then how
What's
can
it
I
trying
give
to
myself
get?
that in healthy ways instead of
Exactly.
yelling?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
beautiful. I really like that. That's a great summary for it.
Cool.
Yeah. Last question, Josh. You know, should we be communicating when we're triggered?
Yes. Yes and no,
Yeah.
in my opinion.
Yeah.
Depends on who you are. I did a few times in my life. I've done neuro-linguistic programming tests and some courses and stuff. I'm in a weird small percentile of people who is auditory. I'm double auditory first. So for me, speaking things out loud is a natural proclivity I have, and it's a way for me to formulate my thoughts and to get things moving out of me. My wife is auditory last. So we have some real fun communications
Not ideal.
off of that. Not ideal, but she's a writer. For her, it's I can't remember her first. It's either kinesthetic first, I think maybe. But in any case, for her, like, going through writing it out is a way for her to do that. Like, for me, it's stressful for me to have to write something. I need to talk it out. That being said, while I'm in a trigger state, talking to her is probably not or especially if she's a component of the trigger, is not productive.
Bad idea.
Bad
Call a
idea.
bro.
I need to call a bro. I need to talk to a therapist. I need to talk to myself. I need to go for a walk and talk to myself.
Yeah.
Right? So yes, when you're triggered, talk. But I think, like, this is the weird phone call that men don't do. And I would bet any money that most men that are a good friend of yours would agree with this statement. If you ever phone me up and you're like, I'm fucking losing it and I just need to run my mouth for a second, I'd be like, cool, go. Like, no problem at all. Wouldn't cost me nothing. Wouldn't bother me for a second. But guys don't make that call.
No.
So
don't want to burn
you
each
should
other.
make that call.
Yeah, make that call. I agree. Yeah, I look forward to guys making that call. It doesn't happen very often, but I'm always like, number one, puts my problems in perspective. Number two, it's an opportunity for me to help you, which is going to make our friendship stronger, and it just feels good.
Yeah. And so that's the yes part, and then the no part is, like, I think processing things for yourself first is a form of respect for the other people in your environment. So no, you shouldn't, while you're in a triggered state, be talking about it too much in certain contexts or environment, because then you're, like, making your problem everyone else's problem. And when it doesn't need to be. So there is some pre-processing for yourself that has to take place. It doesn't mean you're alone. Doesn't mean to shut down or bottle it up. That's not what I'm saying. But just, if I'm with my wife and my kids and I'm triggered off of something and they're involved in whatever the trigger is, they're not the environment for me to be talking about it.
Yeah, great distinction. And I'll just add one thing on this, because I agree with everything you said, and that is that in my experience and based on what I've read and been told in therapy, you communicating when you're emotional, directing emotions at people usually leads to worse outcomes. So I found that if I bring any frustrated energy, and this is something I still struggle with, if I'm triggered, I bring frustrated energy to somebody, it's going to trigger frustration and defensiveness or all sorts of other stuff in them, and it's just going to make the situation worse. It's like, what outcome do I want? I want to be close to this person, or I want things to go smooth, or I just want to avoid drama. Do process first, talk to other people, not the person that's involved with the thing that you're triggered in.
Yeah.
Because you're going to bring emotions to them, it's going to go poorly, and then you got a whole can of other worms you got to sort through, other stuff you got to unpack, things you might have said that weren't very well said, etc.
Yeah, makes perfect sense.
Anyway, we hope this helps you guys if you're triggered. Remember, there's lots of great guys out there who can lend an ear and stuff like mensgroup.com, or find a bro like Josh or myself to reach out to. And we'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode. If you made it this far, leave some comments below, and we'll chat with you soon.
Send us your triggered comments down below. This episode triggered me. Fuck you, Sean. Write it down below.
Fuck you and your mustache, Josh.
Yeah, nice mustache.
I wish I could
you
grow a
hoser.
mustache. Yeah, totally. Your mustache triggers me because I can't grow one. Yeah. Yeah,
All right, guys.
Tell us how we
Peace.
triggered you in the comments below. Talk soon. Thanks, Josh.